in our day-to-day lives that require us to show a government photo ID. Many things, almost everything. Purchasing alcohol, lottery tickets, tobacco products, boarding flights, renting a car, checking into hotels. If you want to open up a bank account or apply for credit, you must show a photo ID. Marriage license, signing legal documents. Many other benefit programs often require proof of identification as well. Not to mention, my Democrat colleagues in the Senate are supporting ICE agents to prove their identities while deporting criminals. Let federal law enforcement agents do their job, folks. Let them do their job. The hypocrisy from the radical left knows no bounds. Ask yourself, why is it easier ICE to vote than it is to board a plane? Makes no sense. Why are Republican politicians in Washington ignoring the mandate of 77 million American patriots? 77 million voted to get this done. Washington, D.C., we got problems where elected officials are completely out of touch and they don't listen to the people they represent. They vote for themselves, and that's gotten us in trouble. They're more concerned about getting reelected than actually doing what they promised to do on the campaign trail. It's easy to talk, but you need to follow up on what you ran on. For years, Democrats have shouted from the rooftops that it is impossible for illegals to vote in our elections, but the proof is in the pudding. August 2024, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, he announced that they found more than 1 million ineligible voters on the Texas voter rolls. 1 million. In October 2024, the Supreme Court of the United States approved the state of Virginia to remove 1,600 ineligible voters from the voter rolls. Had to be forced to do it. Earlier this year, Oregon was forced to begin removing 800,000 inactive voters from the state registration rolls. Why do they have to be told to do that? It doesn't make any sense. This is not a coincidence. It is an intentional political strategy being orchestrated by the Democratic National Party. Democrats, they've lost their traditional blue-collar and minority voter base. How do we know that? Majority of them just voted for President Trump just a year ago. Because of that, the Democrats have now found themselves a new girlfriend. Who are they? Illegal immigrants. That's why the Democrat-controlled states refuse to work with the Department of Justice and have denied the agency access to the voting rolls. Denied the federal government, oh, you can't see our voting rolls. What do you got to hide? They'd rather fall on their swords for criminal illegal aliens, murderers, rapists, and terrorists to get their votes than prioritize the safety of American citizens. Thanks to the Director of National Intelligence, Director Tulsi Gabbard, Americans are finally seeing evidence of the past fraudulent elections come to light. Millions of Americans have thought for years that there was serious election interference in Fulton County, Georgia during the 2020 presidential election. Thanks to President Trump, FBI Director Kash Patel, and DNI Tulsi Gabbard, the 2020 presidential election ballots have been seized and will soon reveal the real truth to the American people. The Save America Act must be our main priority this year. And that's saying a whole lot because we have got a lot of problems up here, but it's got to be our number one priority. For instance, Washington, D.C. has a serious spending problem. You know, we're more than $38 trillion in debt with nothing to show for it. Or look at the fact that we're one of the sickest countries on earth. Thank God for RFK Jr. and Make America Healthy Again movement. We are working to address this problem. Not to mention all the problems created by the Biden administration in their office for 4 years. But we can't even start addressing these problems until we pass the Save America Act. We have to do it. Luckily, we still have time to get it to the finish line. One way we can do this is to get rid of the outdated 60-vote filibuster. The way it is used today has nothing to do with what it was originally intended for. Instead of the zombie filibuster of today, it's become a tool of obstruction used to overturn the will of the American people. We don't work for the Senate. We work for the American people. The filibuster was set up to allow debate, and that should be happening right here. Real debate on this floor. My Democrat colleagues need to come to the floor and explain to the American people why they want illegals to vote in elections. I'd like to hear it. What's their reasoning? President Trump ran on the common sense policies of Save American Act, and he won also the popular vote, by the way. It's time my Republican colleagues started acting like we were in the majority. We have the power. As Republicans, we currently have 53 seats in the Senate. Clearly, the American people are behind us and support the American First agenda. That's exactly why 77 million people voted in 2024, and we owe it to each and every one of them to get the job done and just sit up here and look at each other. Passing legislation like the Save American Act is essential for the future of our country. We're not going to have another chance. We have no choice. We've got to get it done. If we do not pass this bill, we may never have a secure election in this country again. Never. That's a long time. Democrats will work overtime to import as many illegals to this country as they can. They just showed they'd do it for 4 months or 4 years. We can't allow that to happen again. We are seeing the Democrat strategy play out in real time in other countries as we speak. I've been saying this for years. All you got to do is go to Europe. They're us 10 years from now if we don't pass the Save American Act. It's gone. Their leaders are getting fired right and left. They've lost their moral values, they lost their culture, and they lost their country. All it started with mass migration, which they have allowed to completely destroy what they've had for centuries. The socialist-controlled Spanish government recently imported 500,000 migrants and are in the process of granting residency. You got to be kidding me. Or look at Romania, where the conservative pro-Romania First candidate was cheated out of a victory in 2024 because of made-up claims that Russia had interfered in their elections. Sounds familiar. If we don't pass the Save America Act this year, what's happening in Europe won't just be overseas anymore. It's going to be right here in our backyard because many of the enemy are already inside the gates. Politicians often warn about the crime or national security threats that illegals pose to this country, but this isn't just about American safety. It's also a serious financial problem. You know that every year now we're having to pay for the illegals that are in this country. It costs you and me and every taxpayer in this country $150 billion. What could we do with that money in our states, in our communities, in our neighborhoods? Folks, we have to take our country back. Our borders, we have to take it all back before it's too late. We must get rid of the Dominion voting machines, stop mail-in voting, absentee ballots only in certain situations, stop ballot harvesting, and return the same-day only voting. In my state of Alabama, I get two questions. Are you going to close the border, and are you going to have fair elections? I want my vote to count, and that's the reason I'm here today. If we don't secure our federal elections, we will become a banana republic. It is right around the corner. The American people want it. The only question is, do my colleagues in the Senate want to keep their tradition of the Senate, or do they want to work for the American people? That's the reason we're here. Are we just interested in protecting our own power? I hope not, because it won't be here long if we don't. Let's do the right thing for the American taxpayers and pass the Save American Act. Our nation and future and the future of our kids and grandkids depend on it. Think about it. I yield the floor, Mr. President. I notice the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsor-Brooks.
Mr. President,
Democrat leader,
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
without objection.
Mr. President, on Saturday, Senate and House Democratic leadership, including myself and Leader Jeffries, sent legislative text detailing the 10 items we outlined in our letter, which has been public since Thursday, for reining in ICE. We sent them to our Republican counterparts, including Leader Thune, Speaker Johnson, and the White House. So since Saturday, the ball has been in the Republicans' court. We have no idea of which of our proposals they will accept and which they reject. And when I say that Democrats offered exceedingly reasonable proposals and have the support of the American people, I'm not exaggerating. In fact, many on both sides who have seen our proposals say they're reasonable. We're asking, and they're reasonable for one obvious reason. We're asking ICE to do nothing more than follow the standards that the vast majority of law enforcement agencies already follow. Why should ICE be different, especially when they have such a record of brutality? We're simply saying no barging into people's homes without a judicial warrant. Who on the other side objects to that? No secret police wearing masks with zero identification. Who has police officers in their own jurisdictions who don't have any identification and are not identified at all? Of course not. It's perfectly reasonable. It's how we do law enforcement. I ask Republicans, when have they ever seen a traffic cop wearing a mask? Democrats also say no use of force without a code of conduct. Well, I hope people listen to this. Our proposed language for use of force is based off language currently in effect in the state of Florida. If it's good enough for Florida law enforcement, it certainly should be good enough for Republicans in Congress. Florida hardly is a state run by Democrats. We also cannot have unannounced raids in places like hospitals and elementary schools and polling places. Republicans should ask people back home if they think it's okay for ICE to tail school buses or to have ICE surround the polls, quote unquote, like Steve Bannon and others say. Most Americans would say this has nothing to do with going after criminals and everything to do with intimidation, coercion, and trying to jaundice our election process. Well, Republicans, the clock is ticking. We have sent you our proposals, and they are exceedingly reasonable. I hope our colleagues on the other side, many who, at least here in the Senate, recognize that things need to change, show they're ready to act in a meaningful way. Now on the SAVE Act. As Americans struggle with high costs, fewer jobs, and endless chaos from Donald Trump, House Republicans are choosing to spend their time this week on federalizing Jim Crow. Republicans bristle, the right wing bristles, every time I say that the SAVE Act is Jim Crow 2.0. They don't like it because sometimes the truth hurts. While the specific policies may have changed since the days of the Jim Crow South, the goal of the SAVE Act is the same: disenfranchising American citizens and making it harder for eligible people to vote, particularly low-income Americans and people of color. This is the truth. The SAVE Act is not a mainstream bill whatsoever. It's a fringe piece of legislation that has now taken over the Republican Party, masquerading as election security, when it's really about laying the groundwork to meddle in the midterm elections and make it much harder for people to vote. Here are just some of the nasty reasons the SAVE Act is as extreme as it gets. Number one, the SAVE Act includes such extreme voter registration requirements that, if enacted, it could disenfranchise 21 million American citizens. 21 million. That is more than 10%, or significantly more than 10% of the people who vote. Number two, millions of American citizens, millions, don't have access to the paperwork that SAVE would require and would be in danger of getting shut out of our democracy. For example, if you're one of the 50% of Americans who doesn't have a passport, or if you're one of the tens of millions of Americans who can't quickly access your birth certificate, the SAVE Act would, in effect, take away your right to vote. Number three, the SAVE Act would gut tried and true methods of voter registration. including registration by mail and registering online. That means our service members overseas could get shut out. That means Americans who have trouble leaving their homes could get shut out. That means rural Americans could be shut out of our democracy. The SAVE Act would introduce the 21st century equivalent of a democracy that tolerates literacy tests and asks people to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar. And for what reason? Because Donald Trump, to this day, lies about the 2020 election, and Republicans in the House, dutiful lemmings to the end, eagerly enable his lies and push radical bills pretending they care about election security. The SAVE Act is dead on arrival in the Senate. Senate Democrats will not sign our names to this radical piece of legislation that takes away the right to vote from tens of millions of American citizens. On Epstein, the most important ad that Americans saw during Super Bowl Sunday had nothing to do with a new product or TV show. It was about justice for Jeffrey Epstein's victims. An ad yesterday, championed by the organization World Without Exploitation, reminded the American people of the ugly truth. Millions upon millions of files, roughly half of the Epstein files, are still being locked away by the Department of Justice. And they have failed to explain why in a way that the law requires. The Senate passed legislation unanimously last year requiring these files to be released by December 19th. That was more than 50 days ago. The American people are wondering, and they're still waiting, what is Pam Bondi hiding? Earlier today, Ghislaine Maxwell came before the House Oversight Committee and refused to answer questions, instead invoking the Fifth Amendment for every single question. Later this week, Pam Bondi will testify before the House Judiciary Committee, but to date has failed to show the American people the transparency Americans are demanding. The American people aren't getting the answers they were promised about Jeffrey Epstein. Shame, shame on the Department of Justice. While they continue to hide the truth, Jeffrey Epstein's victims continue to wait for their day of justice. And finally, on a Trump nominee, Jeremy Carl, this week, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will hear testimony about Jeremy Carl, Donald Trump's nominee to be the Assistant Secretary of State for international organizations. To call Jeremy Carl a radical and a bigot and unqualified is all far too kind. Jeremy Carl has a long history of making violent, anti-Semitic, and openly racist comments in podcasts and on social media, which recently he's tried frantically to erase. Of his political opponents, he once said, quote, "There is no peaceful coexistence. We either win or die." He called Juneteenth, quote, "a race-hustling and white-shaming holiday." And if that you're a white person celebrating Juneteenth, you've already surrendered. Can you believe a guy would say this? He said that Jews have often loved to play the victim. And on a podcast a few years ago, he added, throughout history, Jews chose some professions that made them more oppressive. And they can't be surprised that the average descendants of Cossack peasants would be resentful towards them. You believe this? What stereotypical garbage. On the Holocaust, Carl simply says everyone has traumas in their past. In other words, he's saying get over it. That's vile. Jeremy Carl's long history of racist, white supremacist, and anti-Semitic views plainly disqualifies him from serving in a senior diplomatic post at the Department of State. No person who thinks Jews should get over the Holocaust and spreads pernicious Jewish stereotypes can claim to have the character or judgment to serve as a diplomat for this country. Jeremy Carl's nomination should go no further after this week, and he should be forced to answer during testimony for his long history of violent, racist, and anti-Semitic rhetoric. I yield the floor. And note the senator from Washington State has arrived.
President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, before I get started, I just have to say, how about those Seahawks? Congratulations to the Seattle Seahawks on a very well-earned win in last night's Super Bowl. We're very excited to welcome them back home and celebrate a hard-fought victory. Our players brought the grit, the 12s from every part of our state brought the heart, and now our team is bringing home a trophy. I am extra proud of my state today, and I will be introducing a resolution to commemorate this victory. It just goes to show you, you can't spell Washington State without a big W. And I'm not just talking about the Super Bowl here, because in the spending bills that I negotiated, Mr. President, we have a lot more wins headed back home. As of last week, we have gotten 11 of the 12 spending bills for the year signed into law. Now, there is still some very hard work ahead on the DHS spending bill to enact serious accountability measures. The abuses and violence are so blatant and alarming. We've got to rein in these agencies that are trampling Americans' rights. But today, I want to talk about what the bills we did pass so far actually mean for folks back home in my home state of Washington. For one thing, they mean no more slush fund CR that lets Trump rob blue states like mine. Congress is reasserting its authority. These bills mean none of the drastic cuts that Trump and the House Republicans were pushing. And for Washington State, these bills mean nearly $500 million in congressionally directed spending and $5 billion in programmatic spending are headed our way, with much more in federal resources to come later in the form of competitive grants and formula funding. Mr. President, these are projects and programs that make a real, meaningful difference in lives across Washington State. I should know I heard directly from these communities who requested this funding, and I fought side by side with them to secure these investments during very tough negotiations. Now, some phrases like congressionally directed spending, or CDS, can sound pretty vague. It's another DC acronym. So I want to take some time to really spell out what I am bringing back home to Washington State and make sure all the amazing things happening in our communities don't stay buried in jargon. Because the reality is these are some of the most concrete projects we fund with results you can go and see firsthand in our communities. And nothing demonstrates that better than literal concrete projects, or asphalt, as the case may be. In Clark County, I secured $2 million for Ridgefield to continue improvements along Royal Road. Just 15 minutes away from there in Vancouver, I secured $2 million to help reconstruct a section of the Divine Road. Another 20 minutes east in Washougal, I secured $2 million to replace one of the busiest rail crossings in our state with an underpass to separate the trains from the vehicles, which will reduce traffic for drivers, increase rail capacity, and improve safety for pedestrians. In Cowlitz County, I secured $2 million for safety improvements like new sidewalks along Columbia Heights Road. This is going to be a huge relief to parents of many children who regularly walk that road on their way to Columbia Heights Elementary School and Cascade Middle School. In Douglas County, I secured $10 million to help build the Wenatchee Landing Interchange, which will increase traffic flow with new roundabouts and increase safety with separate bike paths for pedestrians, and facilitate new housing and commercial developments across the river from the growing city of Wenatchee. Folks in Douglas County will tell you this project is a big deal and it's going to mean hundreds of jobs. In Pierce County, I secured $2.5 million to replace deteriorating roads on a key freight route to the Port of Tacoma and over 300 businesses in the Manufacturing Industrial Center. In Pend Oreille County, I secured over $700,000 to help get Dyke Road back open after a spring runoff caused a devastating failure last year, limiting access to the Kalispell Reservation headquarters and creating very serious risk of leaving people stranded in an emergency. These kinds of crucial road repairs and upgrades aren't the only way, however, that federal funds I secured will make it faster and safer for Washington State families to get from point A to point B. When it comes to buses, I secured $3 million in Snohomish County to support the work on the Swift Gold Line, which will connect Everett and Arlington, two of the largest cities in that county. With stops in Marysville, at Everett Community College, and more, this bus rapid transit line will help workers who are heading to the Cascade Industrial Center, students who are heading to Everett Community College and WSU Everett, and connect North Snohomish to the rest of the regional network, and someday to light rail all the way to Seattle and Tacoma. When it comes to ferries, I secured nearly $2 million to help the Port of South Whidbey to replace a dock at the South Marina with updated facilities. This would be a big step towards pedestrian ferry service between Clinton on Whidbey Island and Everett, something that has been proposed for a long time and would make a big difference for commuters. In addition to CDS, I secured $25 million for federal urban ferry grants and $20 million for rural ferry grants. And I made sure Washington State Ferries can compete for that funding. We all want ferries that run safely and on time, and I'm thinking long-term here. I will continue fighting for major federal funding streams dedicated to supporting ferries because for states like mine, it is really important for daily commuters. Now let's talk about public transit. I believe in public transit. Why? Because the people in Washington State voted for it again and again, and it works. Let's look at the Sound Transit in Seattle. Public transit means you can get from your apartment on Capitol Hill to your job at the UW, back down to dinner and boba in the International District. Painless, no hassle, public transit in your daily commute, that is the dream for many people in Washington State. Every time we expand public transit, it means more foot traffic for small businesses, more ways to get to work without being crushed by traffic, and more connections between our communities. How has that been possible? Well, in large part thanks to the capital investment grants. Federal funding has helped us connect Linwood to Federal Way, and just next month you'll be able to take the train all the way across the lake to Bellevue and Redmond. Yet, House Republicans wanted to cut those capital investment grants by 98%. They wanted to basically obliterate federal funding for public transit. So I said, no way. I don't really think you could call House Republicans an unstoppable force, but I am certainly an immovable object when it comes to defending public transit. I've gone to the mat for public transit since back when George W. Bush tried to defund Sound Transit in its earliest days. Now, we all know that Trump will use every tool possible to stall SIG projects. So I also made sure Congress wrote into law explicitly how this funding should be allocated to projects to make certain Washington State gets its fair share, including $100 million for the light rail component of the I-5 bridge replacement program and $82 million for bus rapid transit in Spokane. Overall, fighting for this funding supports future projects down the line all across Washington State. And beyond public transit, Washington State is a proud hub of trade, which is why I worked hard to secure $8 million to help Terminal 18 on Harbor Island provide offshore power on site, meaning that when vessels like our enormous shipping container boats dock, they don't have to run their engines to keep the lights on. They'll be able to plug into the local power grid, which will save money, reduce emissions, and improve air quality. And while these projects are making progress, other funds I secured are fueling research to chart a course for future improvements, like $1 million for the Pacific Northwest Economic Region Foundation to strengthen supply chains and logistics throughout our region, and $500,000 for the Puget Sound Regional Council so it can make sure its regular survey of the area's travel behaviors and infrastructure needs includes the voices from all of our communities. Now, in Washington State, of course, infrastructure is not just our roads and our bridges and our public transportation. It is our waterways and our water systems as well, which is why when it comes to programmatic funding, I'm pleased to say I secured a record $3.47 billion for the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, and I included language that makes clear that states like Washington are not going to be shortchanged. We will get our fair share. This has been a very long, hard-fought battle, one I have fought for more than a decade. But the tides turned in a major way back in 2024 and is nothing short of a sea change when it comes to annual funding for the ports of Seattle and Tacoma. I also secured crucial design funds for the Seattle Harbor Project. That investment secures Seattle's future as a global trade and maritime hub, supporting thousands of local jobs while enabling new generation of cleaner, more efficient vessels to protect our Puget Sound ecosystem. I also secured funding for the Columbia River Turning Basins Project. Southwest Washington economy moves on the water, but our rivers, parking, and turning spots are stuck in the past. This project is the final piece of the puzzle, making sure that the world's ships can dock safely and our farmers' grain reaches the sea faster. Now, I have to talk about investments I secured to address another element of managing our water resources, and that is especially top of mind now after the devastating storms we saw last year, and that is flood control. For example, funding for American rivers and their crucial work supporting communities across our state to manage their floodplains and make our state flood resilient. Or funding to help model and monitor the Cowlitz and Toutle rivers so cities nearby can evaluate their flood protection and plan accordingly. And in addition to protecting our cities, we have to protect our ecosystems, which are irreplaceable, and our fish, which are truly a way of life in Washington State. Now, beyond CDS projects, I also stood my ground to defend several federal programs our state relies on. Protecting the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund at $65 million, which Trump tried to eliminate entirely, and increasing fund for our Pacific salmon account at the National Marine Fisheries Service, the Mitchell Act salmon hatcheries, and EPA's Puget Sound and Columbia River Basin geographic programs. As long as I'm a senator here in Washington, D.C., our fish and our salmon have a voice in Congress. So when it comes to projects for our fish and the communities that rely on them, I secured funding for the Columbia River Fish Mitigation Program, funding to remove the Bateman Island Causeway. That is work happening as we speak right now, which has blocked access for salmon migration and left them vulnerable to invasive species. Funding to install new irrigation lines and remove existing irrigation divergence in Cowiche Creek, which will improve habitat for steelhead and coho salmon. And funding to live up to our treaty obligations and bring our tribal fishing access sites on the Columbia River up to health and safety standards. And of course, I have to mention the $190 million I secured to continue our progress on the Howard Hansen Dam, something that is critical to our fish, our water supply, and our flood resistance alike. This was a project Trump tried really hard to cut. Last year, he straight up robbed $500 million, gave it away to red states. But if the president wants to have a fight over our fish and our water on the Green River, make my day. This was a fight I fought and I won. I secured huge investment to get progress back on track at Howard Hansen, and I'm not going to stop fighting until we see this work through to the end. And when it comes to pipes and water infrastructure, I worked hard to keep federal dollars flowing to communities across our state. I secured funding for projects to get our communities clean drinking water, like building new pump and pressure stations for the city of Chelan to make sure the water system is reliable, even in power outages, removing PFAS contamination from a well in Moses Lake so it can provide safe, drinkable water to that community, replacing an old iron water main in Redmond to reduce the risk of a break and improve water quality, increasing the groundwater sources and pumping capacity in Sunnyside to improve reliability and avoid potential shortages, and making upgrades in Skamania County to improve resilience so our wildfires don't cause dangerous water shortages. Of course, it's not just bringing water into our communities that count. I also secured funding for important wastewater and sewage products, like eliminating a failing septic tank system in Wallace Heights and helping those homeowners connect to the county wastewater system, upgrading sewer lines in Douglas County when they are moved for a major highway project, installing a new sewer line in Carbonado, and replacing century-old clay pipelines and pipes, replacing a failing water lift in Granite Falls that poses a safety hazard to a local elementary school there, and connecting the Samish Indian Nation Summit Park campus to the city of Anacortes' sewer system. Of course, there's another important pipeline we need to be investing in as well, and that is our skills pipeline. And there are several projects I help fund in this bill that will connect people with new skills and set them up to pursue promising careers. I secured funding for Workforce Southwest Washington, which aims to provide over 200 people with career services and case management, and the Workforce Development Council of Seattle-King County, which is working to address healthcare workforce shortages by building a school-to-work partnership between local colleges, unions, and others. And when it comes to our colleges and universities, I secured funding for the Northwest Indian College to help start its cybersecurity program, for Washington State University to develop coursework that better prepares students to pursue work in healthcare, and for Retton Technical College to strengthen its offerings in aerospace and manufacturing. This is a crucial field in the Kent Valley. Another program at Green River College will help military members and their families overcome barriers to higher education. And let us not forget our littlest learners. I secured funding for programs that help them learn and grow, from expanding the hands-on Children's Museum in Olympia with a focus on preschools and camps and a new early learning center, to expanding Page Ahead's statewide effort to fight learning loss with their summer reading program called Book Up Summer, which provides kids books to read at no cost and hosts book discussion nights for their families, to supporting the 253 Skills Center, which is developing an interactive curriculum to teach hundreds of students about the maritime sector, or to replacing failing infrastructure at Nature Bridges facilities in the Olympic National Park, which gives students an incredible opportunity to explore one of our state's amazing national parks. And last but not least here, we funded a hands-on gardening program that helps young kids learn and grow along with their garden. And when it comes to education policy, this president gets an F from this former preschool teacher and former school board member. I ripped up Trump's budget and made clear Congress would not abolish the Department of Education. Instead, we funded Washington State's Title I schools. We continue to invest so students with disabilities can get the education that they deserve. And we supported so many of the critical programs administered by the Department of Education. I'm sure this president would love nothing more than to tear apart our public education system and sell off the scraps to Betsy DeVos, but not as long as former educators like me have anything to say about that. And it's not just the little ones who are going to make big discoveries around the world, because I was able to secure funding for important research priorities across Washington State, from modernizing the Kirsten Wind Tunnel testing facility and the radiocarbon lab at UW, to purchasing high-performance storage infrastructure that will bolster UW's AI research, to establishing a new scientific research center at WSU that is focused on aquatic resources and ecosystems, to research on Orcas Island, tracking the health of killer whales and learning how we can best protect that endangered species. That's not even considering all the medical funding we protected by rejecting Trump's sabotage proposals, rejecting his 40% cut to NIH, and instead increasing medical research. And it's not even considering the funding we protected for the Department of Energy Research and for the National Science Foundation, which means we are continuing to invest in groundbreaking work that is constantly happening at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and rejecting Trump's attempt to close the LIGO facility in the Tri-Cities. And of course, anyone who knows me know I'm always focused on childcare, which is why I'm very pleased to say that in addition to increasing funding for the Child Care Development Block Grant and Head Start and protecting preschool development grants, I was able to direct funds to several important child care initiatives in Washington State. From $6.2 million for the construction of Bremerton Early Learning Center, which is going to be located near one of the largest employers in Kitsap County and provide a crucial new child care option for working families there, to over $1 million for a program in Clark County, which is focused on increasing the supply of quality, affordable child care, to $600,000 for the organization Open Doors for Multicultural Families, so it can work on starting up a new early childhood education center at the Kent Des Moines Light Rail site. Now, if you believe, like I do, that a budget is a statement of your values, then President Trump's budget was morally bankrupt. It ignored fiscal reality and human consequences. The president wanted to drastically cut funding and access for housing and homelessness programs. He effectively wanted to kick millions of people out on the street, and that is just plain wrong. Having a roof over your head is about as fundamental as it gets. So I again tore up the president's budget, and instead I secured a $4.1 billion or 6% increase in rental assistance and a $366 million increase in homeless assistance programs. It's not everything, but you better believe it matters and it will make a difference. So that is a win in my book. People deserve a safe place to sleep. They deserve help in tough times. Housing and homelessness are a crisis in Washington State. So I made certain to secure funding for very local projects to address homelessness and increase affordable housing across Washington State. In Seattle, this funding will support 150 units of affordable housing through the Low Income Housing Institute, 181 units through Bellwether Housing, 162 affordable housing units through the Seattle Indian Services Commission, and another 500 through the City of Seattle's Fort Lawton redevelopment program. I also funded projects that will support 60 affordable housing units for seniors in Spokane, 40 new units plus a library and a community center in Kelso, 38 affordable housing units for families in the foster system in Renton, 20 affordable townhome rentals at the Pea Patch Community Campus on Orcas Island, 12 sleeping units for homeless youth at the Shelton Family Center in Mason County, safety upgrades to retain 38 units for housing the community roots housing, and a transit-friendly housing project that is focused on serving farm workers in Linden. And it's not just housing we are building for people, it's the wraparound services that help people get on their feet and stay on their feet when times are hard. In Vancouver, funding for the Council for the Homeless will support expansion of the Housing Solutions Center so it can increase capacity and connect more families to housing and resources. And funding for the Aiken Family Resource Center, which will allow long-needed renovations, including better storage space for family essentials like diapers and hygiene products, a behavioral health wing with a dozen large therapy rooms, and a community kitchen with an attached childcare room and more. All told, that will help double their capacity and continue their crucial work connecting struggling families to the resources they need. There's also support in this bill for the United Way King County's home grocery delivery program, which helps fill a crucial gap in food security, and funding for renovations at the Partners in the Northwest, which operates the largest food pantry and clothing bank in Spokane County and the largest free diaper bank in the Inland Northwest. This will help them renovate a new space to increase their warehouse capacity by over 7 times and to give room to partner organizations that connect these families with other services. Now, to improve access to care for our rural communities, I secured funding to help expand and modernize the clinics for surgical services at Kittitas Valley Healthcare, which sees 4,500 patients annually. Another crucial challenge I know communities are continuing to struggle with is the mental health and substance use crisis. So I fought really hard to secure funding for several projects that tackle this head-on. In Spokane County, the funds I passed will help convert an old public works property into a 23-hour crisis relief center that will provide much-needed continuous behavioral health care like mental health care and substance use care. Additionally, I secured more funds for the Spokane Mobile Alternative Response Teams, or SMART program. SMART units free up police, firefighters, and EMTs by offering another response option for emergencies like overdose and mental health crises. They already respond to 2,000 calls a year, increasing the capacity of the other first responders, and these funds will help build on that work. In King County, I secured funds for Seattle Children's Hospital to provide a safe and comfortable space for kids in crisis who are at risk of seriously harming themselves or taking their own lives. funds to help Seattle's fire department post-overdose response team to provide wraparound services, and funds for the Seattle Indian Health Board's new Thunderbird Treatment Center on Vashon Island, which will provide crucial residential recovery care. In Whatcom County, I secured funding for the Lummi Indian Nation to establish a dedicated space for community members to hold Narcotics and Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. The Tacoma Pierce County Health Department will also get new funds to help expand a mobile medical unit to provide opioid use disorder treatment, primary care, behavioral health, and wraparound services. Meanwhile, another mobile clinic I secured funds for will help put substance use treatment in reach of rural patients in Clark and Klickitat and Skamania counties. And there are still a lot of other projects I funded in these bills that will make their impact felt across the state. Funds for the Washington State Hospital Association will help improve maternal care in rural communities through training and assistance and simulations at 43 rural hospitals across our state. Funds for dental equipment at CMARS Community Health Center in Tacoma will help establish a new dental school that will also serve Yakima and Kennewick to help address our statewide dentist shortage. Funds for the Washington Recovery Alliance, which will help establish a network of regional coalitions to coordinate our response to substance use and mental health challenges across the state. Funds for communities in schools of Washington State will help expand their mental health support network, which equips schools across our state with experts and resources to meet their students' mental health care needs. And funds for the Washington Poison Center, which will update its emergency infrastructure and better serve the many families who call them for free life-saving advice. And let's not forget some other incredible programs that support our communities, which I fought to fund in this bill. We included funds for the Need of Community Society, which provides young adults with disabilities the chance to enjoy the great outdoors, which we all love in Washington. I funded the National Asian Pacific Center on Aging Helpline, which offers crucial assistance to seniors across the state when English may not be their first language. I funded the Northwest Native Chamber Technical Assistance Program, which gives no-cost business support to small business owners based on their needs, and the Seattle Good Businesses Network Plan to establish a shared food facility to help small businesses, bakers, and professionals across the kitchen space as they need to grow and thrive. I also fought to provide crucial funding to help the King County Sexual Assault Resource Center continuing its important work getting survivors the support they need. And I'm proud to say that after years of fighting to stop Donald Trump from selling off our national archives and records in Seattle during his first term, this year the tables have truly turned as I secured $30 million in this bill for a new National Archives facility in the Seattle area so we can better preserve Washington State's rich tribal and local history for generations to come. And of course, I have to note that I was once again able to secure record funding for Hanford cleanup and resources to support the incredible workers who power that mission. A lot of presidents have tried to cut corners when it comes to Hanford. I've always made sure to set them straight. I remind each and every one of them of our legal and moral obligation to Hanford. If that doesn't work, I made sure to write the appropriate amount of resources we need for Hanford into our funding bill. And then I make sure the president signs that into law. Mr. President, I know I've been speaking for a while, so while there are many wins I haven't covered, I will wrap up. But for as long as I've been speaking, I can assure you I fought for these programs much longer. And if I had to fight even longer still, my colleagues should know, and President Trump should definitely know, I won't slow down a bit. You know, a lot of critics like to say, Patty, you're a bleeding heart. You care too much about childcare and schools and the environment. Well, yeah, you bet I do. And you better believe that's going to be reflected in how this federal government spends our taxpayer dollars. Trump might want money to build an arch that's named after him. I want money to fund rental assistance and health care. So I don't care who calls me a bleeding heart. When it comes to fighting for Washington State, I don't give an inch. And I bring back every single dollar from my constituents that I can, down to the penny. I am here to be a voice for my people, the moms and dads who are both working full-time jobs and the people who had to take loans out to go to school. moms and dads in tennis shoes have just as much right to be heard in how we spend our taxpayer dollars as the lobbyists who crowd the hallways here in D.C. So that's who I am here to speak up for and make sure it gets heard when it comes to our nation's spending bills. That is a power we all have, each and every senator. We have the power of the purse. And this is why it is so important we use that power and we defend it from Trump and Russ vote. We saw last year just how much damage they can do with a slush fund CR. Well, the bills this year show just how much good we can do when we refuse to leave the table, refuse to take no for an answer, and refuse to give up our power to President Trump. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Senator from Texas.
President, are we in a quorum call?
We are.
I'd ask consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Just over a month ago, a video went viral on the internet that exposed a shocking fraud scheme by Somali nationals in Minnesota. An organization that went by the name of Quality Learning Center, or Quality Leering Center, as they misspelled it, was receiving massive amounts of federal funding, by some estimates more than $1 million, under the pretext of providing child care. However, as the video shows, the facility was not in fact a daycare center, and there were no children present. The mainstream media may have moved on from this scandal, but our job here in Congress on this scandal is not done. Matter of fact, it's just beginning. I applaud President Trump and his administration for quickly freezing federal child care funds to Minnesota in the wake of this alleged fraud scheme. This will give government officials a chance to conduct a thorough investigation to find out exactly what was going on before more money is shoveled out the door to potential swindlers. These are U.S. taxpayer dollars, and they were intended to fund a program to help make child care more accessible to those who needed it. Instead, these tax dollars are lining the pockets of a group of charlatans and fraudsters. Now, The radical left, of course, has villainized the young independent journalist who uncovered this scandal, calling for his death on social media. They've accused him of, quote, bringing ICE to Minnesota and put up posters encouraging people to tell him to kill himself if they see him. But as we all know, the American people voted in record numbers last fall for President Trump, who ran on a program of immigration enforcement. And we all know that what President Trump says he means, and he'll follow through on. I don't think there was ever a doubt in the minds of the American people about where Donald Trump stood on illegal immigration. If anyone is responsible for bringing ICE to Minnesota, it would be the criminal aliens who came into the country illegally and the feckless politicians, including President Joe Biden, who refused to enforce our immigration laws. President Trump is simply keeping his word to the American people who elected him. But the notion this young man should be somehow ashamed for shining a light on this fraud that occurs in Minnesota is simply absurd. The mainstream media, once again, is failing the test of objectivity. It is not telling the truth about who ICE is targeting, particularly the criminal aliens, including fraudsters, that were responsible for this scandal. This deception encourages left-wing radicals to target young men, young journalists like Nick Shirley. Well, Mr. President, it's important to note that the fraud scheme at Quality Learning Center is hardly an isolated case. The state of Minnesota has been under federal investigation on multiple occasions for fraud schemes with federal taxpayer dollars. In 2022, the Department of Justice investigated a Minnesota nonprofit, non-governmental organization, NGO, known as Feeding Our Future. The department ultimately charged 47 defendants associated with Feeding Our Future for participating in a massive fraud scheme. These defendants took advantage of taxpayer-funded programs intended to provide food for needy children and used it to enrich themselves, buying luxury cars, jewelry, and vacation properties in other countries. More recently, last September, 8 defendants were charged by the federal government with participating in a housing stabilization fraud scheme. That same month, another woman was charged for participating in a fraud scheme involving an autism program. This woman was also participating in the Feeding Our Future fraud scheme and allegedly stole nearly $500,000. There's clearly a problem here and a pattern. When describing the full extent of fraud cases in Minnesota, this is what one federal prosecutor said. He said, "What we see are schemes stacked upon schemes, draining resources meant for those in need. It feels never ending. I have spent my career as a fraud prosecutor, and the depth of the fraud in Minnesota takes my breath away." Well, while the state of Minnesota has a long-standing history of widespread fraud, we'd be foolish to assume that this is an isolated event, and it's high time for Congress to address it. These instances of fraud are illegal diversion of federal tax dollars, so it should be of concern to all taxpayers, not just those in the state of Minnesota. In the last year, we've seen dozens of arrests, charges, and convictions of illegal aliens who committed public benefit and other types of fraud all across America. For this reason, as chair of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration and Border Security, I'm hosting a hearing tomorrow entitled "Somali Fraud in Minnesota, the Tip of the Iceberg." In this hearing, we will begin by examining the most recent case of child care fraud in Minnesota, but we will not limit our inquiry to this recent scandal that has dominated the headlines. We'll also go a step further and look at the long-standing endemic cases of fraud committed by illegal aliens all over the United States. We'll hear from several witnesses, including Rebecca Gambler, Chief Quality Officer and Managing Director of Audit Policy and Quality Assurance with the Government Accountability Office. She'll be able to offer GAO's perspective on these long-standing abuses of taxpayer dollars. Simon Hankinson, a former Foreign Service officer who currently serves as a research fellow on Border Security and Immigration at the Heritage Foundation, will also testify. We'll hear from another Foreign Service officer, Philip Linderman, who's now a fellow at the Ben Franklin Fellowship. And finally, Matt O'Brien, Deputy Director at the Federation for American Immigration Reform, or FAIR, will speak to this issue. All of these witnesses will help us get a better handle on the full breadth of the problem posed by illegal immigration and the aliens who are abusing our country's welfare system in order to send money back home to their home countries. But let me be clear, it's not racist or xenophobic to target fraud wherever it's found. Fraud's not a victimless crime, and neither is identity theft. And Democrat attempts to deflect discussions of fraud or an injustice to the victims of these crimes, which happen to be all the American taxpayers. Furthermore, these incidents raise questions about the prevalence of government grants and contracts to non-governmental organizations. For us here in Congress, we'll consider whether it is wise to continue to dole out funds to non-governmental organizations without sufficient accountability mechanisms in place. Recently, I introduced the Stop Fraud by Strengthening Oversight and More Accountability for Lying and Illegal Activity Act, or Stop Fraud by Somalia Act, to amend the Child Care and Development Block Grant Program and impose strict penalties on child care providers who commit fraud. But as we know, this issue touches virtually every industry. It's nothing short of an insult to the generosity of the American taxpayer that aliens are able to enter the country and enrich themselves by taking advantage of federal programs that are intended to help needy Americans. Hardworking American citizens who paid taxes to the U.S. government deserve accountability for how their dollars are being spent. And tomorrow's hearing will help shine a light on just how rampant this abuse is. Mr. President, I look forward to tomorrow's hearing so we can get to the root of this rampant abuse that's happening not just in Minnesota, but all over the country, and begin to take concrete and positive steps to stop it. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call in relation to the borough's nomination.
Without objection.
And I yield the floor. I'll note
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President,
The senator from Ohio,
I ask unanimous consent to suspend the quorum call.
without objection. The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Daniel E. Burrows of Colorado to be an Assistant Attorney General, signed by 17 senators.
Under the previous order, the mandatory quorum call under Rule 22 has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of Daniel E. Burrows of Colorado to be an Assistant Attorney General shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks. Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Husted. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Justice. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kim. Mr. King. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Langford. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lujan. Ms. Lummis. Mr. Markey. Mr. Marshall. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McCormick. Mr. Merkley. Mrs. Moody. Mr. Moran. Mr. Marino. Mr. Mullen. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Paul. Mr. Peters. Mr. Reed. Mr. Ricketts. Mr. Risch. Ms. Rosen. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schiff. Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott of Florida. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Sheehy. Ms. Slotkin. Ms. Smith. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Thune. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warnock. Ms. Warren. Mr. Welch. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Banks, Crapo, Grassley, Haggerty, Husted, Marshall, Marino, Paul, and Tillis. Senators voting in the negative: Blunt Rochester, Booker, Cortez Masto, Duckworth, Durbin, Gallego, Kim, Klobuchar, Markey, Murphy, Murray, Rosen, Schatz, Van Hollen, and Warner. Ms. Warren. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Mr. Peters. Mr. Peters, no. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, no. Ms. Ernst. Ms. Ernst, aye. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Young. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Warnock. Mr. Warnock, no. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kane, no. Mr. Hickenlooper. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Ms. Lemus. Ms. Lemus, aye. Mrs. Shaheen. Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden, no. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Rounds, aye. Mr. Budd. Mr. Budd, aye.
You know, he's
Mr.
got the
King.
same agent
Mr. King,
as-
no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, no. Ms. Hirono. Ms. Hirono, no.
Take it out on my boys.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, aye.
Yep.
Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson,
If you
aye.
could pick anyone. that he
Ms.
gets
Hassan.
hurt
Ms. Hassan, no.
And that Dak.
Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Langford. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Mullen. Mr. Mullen, aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye.
You are.
Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, aye. Mrs. Moody. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso, aye.
Thank you.
Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley, no. Mrs. Blackburn. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Mrs. Capito. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. McCormick. Mr. McCormick, aye. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy, aye. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Daines. Mr. Daines, aye. Mr. Ricketts. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Moran. Mr. Moran, aye. Ms. Smith. Ms. Smith, no. Mr. Fetterman. Mr. Fetterman, no. Mr. Lujan. Mr. Lujan, no. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mrs. Britt. Mrs. Britt, aye. Mr. Padilla? Mr. Padilla, no. Mr. Schiff? Mr. Schiff, no. Mr. Curtis? Mr. Curtis, aye. Mr. Justice? Mr. Justice, aye. Mr. Kelly? Mr. Kelly, no. Mr. Thune? Mr. Thune, aye. Ms. Alsobrooks? Ms. Alsobrooks, no. Ms. Slotkin? Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Reed? Mr. Reed, no. Mr. Whitehouse? Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Bennett? Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schmidt. Aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal. No. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer. No. Mr. Sheehy. Mr. Sheehy. Aye. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons. No. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski. Aye. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman. Aye. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Heinrich. No. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 51, the nays are 47, and the motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Department of Justice, Daniel E. Burrows of Colorado to be an Assistant Attorney General.
Senator from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week on February 3rd, an illegal immigrant from Kyrgyzstan who was allowed into the United States under Joe Biden in 2023 killed 4 people on State Road 67 in Indiana, not far from where I live. He drove a semi-truck head-on into a van. That van was carrying a 50-year-old father and 2 boys who were only 19 and 25 years old, along with a family friend, and they were all from a local Amish community. And now they're all dead. And I'm angry about it. I've had enough of it. Because it's stories like this that show why mass deportations matter and why they're needed now more than ever. At least 7 Hoosiers have died on Indiana highways in the past 6 months because of illegal immigrants recklessly driving on our roads. And at least 8 more have been seriously injured, and those are just the cases that I know about. In November, an illegal immigrant with a fake green card crashed his SUV into a van, killing the 76-year-old driver from Decatur, again, not far from Columbia City where I live, before fleeing the scene. The illegal immigrant also seriously injured 3 innocent drivers in that same crash. Shortly before that accident, an illegal immigrant who was driving drunk and without a license crashed his car into 2 young parents who were on their way to pick up their kids from their grandparents' house. The young couple was seriously injured. I've seen images of the wreck, and they are lucky to be alive. And just a couple of days before that, an illegal immigrant from the country of Georgia was driving a truck and towing a trailer when he swerved abruptly and forced a military Humvee off the road. That crash killed Hoosier National Guardsman Terry Fry and seriously injured 3 others. Terry was just 23 years old. In October, an illegal immigrant driving a semi-truck killed a 54-year-old man on Highway 20 in Indiana when he failed to stop in traffic. That illegal immigrant had a fake trucking license and owned a trucking company that received a $35,000 loan and taxpayer dollars funded through PPP. At least 7 innocent Hoosiers have died in their own state because of illegal immigrant drivers. Every single one of these deaths were preventable. Every single one of these deaths happened because someone who shouldn't have been in our country in the first place got behind the wheel and killed American citizens. Most of the deaths were at the hands of illegal immigrants driving semi-trucks. Trucking is an incredibly important industry in my state because Indiana sits at the crossroads of the country. In fact, our state motto is literally the crossroads of America. Indiana is the 5th busiest state in the country for commercial traffic freight. Each year, 724 million tons of freight travels through Indiana. I speak to truckers regularly, and they are outraged by what's happening. One of my friends who works in the trucking industry said many trucking companies are hiring illegal immigrants to drive their trucks because they can pay them less. That takes jobs away from hardworking Americans. They'd rather take care of their bottom line than put safe and trustworthy drivers out on the road. We have to hold those trucking companies accountable for endangering us all. In fact, the truck that killed 4 Hoosiers last week belonged to a shady trucking company that the industry refers to a, quote, chameleon carrier. Chameleon carriers are trucking companies that, after being shut down or heavily fined by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, just disguise themselves by changing their name or address or Department of Transportation number to continue operating. Many of these chameleon carriers are run by foreign nationals. The Government Accountability Office has said that chameleon carriers are 3 times more likely to be involved in serious crashes than legitimate operators. Mr. President, not only are illegal immigrants and foreign nationals running illicit trucking companies, but Democrat states like California and New York and Pennsylvania are giving out commercial driver's licenses to illegal immigrants like they're Halloween candy. In fact, 50% of CDLs reviewed by the Department of Transportation in New York had been issued improperly. The driver of the truck that killed Indiana National Guardsman Terry Fry got his CDL from New York after he was waved across the border by the Biden administration in 2022. When police arrived at the scene of the crash, they reported that there was, quote, a language barrier and that a translator was needed at the scene. How could anyone give this guy a CDL to begin with? If he couldn't even talk to police, do we really believe that he could read our road and traffic signs? Do we really think that illegal immigrants who can't even speak English can obey our road rules? The law doesn't think so. Federal regulations require that commercial truck drivers be proficient in English. Think about how insane this is. You get into the country illegally, you're living in violation of federal law, but Democrat politicians in blue states violate the law and let you drive an 18-wheeler across state lines. It's more than just insane, it's dangerous and deadly. And it's this reckless policy that's getting people killed in Indiana. So while Hoosiers are being killed in their own state by illegal immigrants, what are Democrats this week doing in Congress? They're trying to cut funding to ICE. They're working to prevent illegal immigrants from being taken off of our streets. We have a federal agency whose job it is to enforce immigration law and remove people who are here illegally. But Democrats want to defund that agency. They want to tie ICE's hands while illegal immigrant truckers are killing Americans on our highways. This is a deliberate choice to prioritize illegal immigrants over American citizens. Mr. President, this has to stop, and it's got to stop right now. We need to support President Trump's efforts to deport every illegal immigrant out of this country. We are not doing enough to get them off of our roads, as you can see in my state, in Indiana. Every day that we wait, every day that Democrats want to play petty politics, we run the risk of more Americans and more Hoosiers dying on our highways. ICE needs more resources, not fewer, so that we can get illegal immigrants off of our streets and out of semi-trucks driving on our highways. Hoosiers have had enough. I've had enough. It's time that Congress started acting like American lives were worth protecting. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. President,
Senator from Indiana.
I ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding Rule 22, all post-cloture time be expired and the Senate vote on confirmation of the Burrows nomination at 11:30 a.m. tomorrow. And if any nominations are confirmed during Tuesday's session of the Senate, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I understand that there are 3 bills at the desk, and I ask for the first reading on block.
The clerk will read the titles of the bills for the first time.
S3805, a bill to amend Chapter 93 of Title 18 United States Code to prohibit obstruction of immigration laws by official interference. H.R. 1834, an act to advance policy priorities that will break the gridlock. H.R. 6500, an act to extend duty-free treatment provided with respect to imports from certain countries in Africa and so forth and for other purposes.
I now ask for a second reading, and I object to my own request, all on block.
Objection is heard. The bills will be read for the second time on the next legislative day.
I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on the Judiciary be discharged from further consideration. The Senate now proceed to S-Res 586.
The clerk will report.
S-Res 586, raising awareness and encouraging the prevention of stalking by designating January 2026 as National Stalking Awareness Month.
Without objection, the committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, February 10th, that following the prayer and pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the 2 leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and the Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each. Further, that the Senate recess following the confirmation vote on the Burroughs nomination until 2:15 p.m. to allow for the weekly conference meetings.
Without objection.
If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.